Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about using the trinket Storm Eater's Boon as a Rep Paladin in Mythic Plus dungeons. I'm going to be going through Ruby life pools in this instance here, and talking about when to use it and how to use it, and projecting like how to use it in other dungeons as well. This is a trinket that I used all through Season 1, I'm using it now, and it's very good if you're doing really big pulls, right? If you're not doing very big pulls, you're pulling 3-4 mobs at a time, one pack at a time, it's going to lose a lot of value. But if you find yourself or your tanks are pulling 2 or 3 packs together, it gains a ton of value if you're doing that. So as Rep Paladins, this is a very contested trinket, right? Because you can't move when you use it, which can cause some trouble because you might die, right? If you physically can't move, you can't cancel it. But as Paladins, we do have the ability to bubble it and use Divine Shield. Now, of course, you are then using your Divine Shield offensively every time you do that. So that is something to think about there. You also can notice that the cooldown of Storm Eater's Boon and Divine Shield is actually very similar. It's just a little bit. It's 3.5 based on Divine Shield to 3-minute based on Storm Eater's Boon. So that they do kind of pair well together in that way, to where you can make it work to every time you use your Storm Eater's Boon, you can Divine Shield. Of course, that means you're not using it other places, which means you need to be using your defenses smartly in other places as well if you want to play super, super safe. Another thing, just right off the top of the bat here, if you are Divine Shielding offensively because of your Storm Eater's Boon, you can also then sacrifice a player while you're bubbled, right? So as you do dungeons more, you kind of know which packs hurt what type of players. Is it range players that are in danger? Is it the tank in danger on this pull? Is the healer? One thing you might notice, and something I notice in a lot of pugs, is sometimes healers are keeping everyone else alive, but their own health is spiking pretty bad. So maybe you just throw it on the healer to make that pull really easy for the healer while they're sacrificed while you are in your Divine Shield. That's just kind of like a big meta play you can do here. I thought the best way to do this would be have an already clear dungeon because I wouldn't really be able to simulate it perfectly, and I don't have 4 people to say, here, pull this exactly like this and actually run a dungeon and do it. The only other thing I could do is record Mythic Plus of this and then say well, if we would have pulled this, if we would have pulled that. Instead, we're just going to run through here. So the first mob is going to be the big rock guy here. And obviously, if you're going to do a big pull, it's going to then be the next group up here, and then a couple groups inside the room, right? And then generally you're going to pull it all back into this corridor or in the front here and go ham on it. So for this one, this is where you want to use your Storm Eater's Boon. Right here on the first pull, it's going to get the max uses out of it for this particular dungeon, right? And for each dungeon, you're going to have places where you kind of are planning on using it, right? To get the most uses out of it, to use it the safest way possible. Now, for this particular pull, you have to hope that you do not get targeted with the big rock guy's circle on the ground, because that's not something you want to be hit with, especially on a high enough key. Now, a low enough key, then maybe you can survive it with defensives. But if you're on a high enough key, you're not going to be able to survive it. So you pull this big pull back here. While you're waiting for them to group up the pull, the rock guy's probably going to do that ability on the ground. I don't know the name of the ability offhand, but it puts a circle patch of earth on the ground. He might have just casted it, so a good time to use it is right after that, right? So that way you're guaranteeing only one more cast of that will even happen while your Storm Eater's Boon is active. So you get to a good position, you pop it, go crazy DPSing here, and if it targets you or somebody close enough to you to where you're in the circle, you'll have to use your bubble here. So this will be a bubble and Storm Eater's Boon on first pull if you get unlucky. If you get lucky, you just don't use the bubble and you're fine. You're fine to use it defensively. In the future, you won't need to use it on the second use in here, and so you'll be fine. I am saying first, second use of this. This is for most keys, right? If you're doing really low keys, which is fine, you might lose a use of this, right? This might not be the best time to lose it if you use it if you're doing a +2. You might want to save it for the second boss, but we'll go through each of the uses for a average key, and you can decide where you would want to use it, right? So for this first one, this is if you're doing the +8, +9, +10. This is kind of what you want to do. But if you're doing a +2, is there even +1s anymore? I can't even remember. But if you're doing a lower key, yeah, there are +1 is just mythic 0. So if you're doing like a +2, then you might, or a mythic 0, you might want to wait for the first boss to use it actually. But if you're doing like a medium key, whatever, this is probably a good first use. Use it here, bubble if you have to on the targeted ground ability, and then you just move on to the next area. So you either bubble if you get into the targeted area, or you just don't worry about it. You'll do the next 1 or 2 pulls depending on how your group pulls it, and then we'll head into the boss room. Now, your Stormwarder's Boon might not be up quite yet, but that's fine because we don't need it until the whelps come out. And that's either going to be the first or the second whelps, depending on how fast you got to this room, right? So you're going to save your Stormeater's Boon for, if it's up for the first whelps, use it on the first whelps. If it's second whelps, use it on the second whelps. So she's going to, you know, summon the eggs from the pools and stuff, and you're going to want to pop it really quick. Now, if you pop it basically, or if the tank is able to drag the boss over towards the eggs a little closer, you want to just use it as quick as you can. Now, at the same time, you don't want to pull threat and just die to all the whelps, right? So it does take a little bit of a brain there to do that. Now, whether or not, because you know your Stormwarder's Boon's back up, your bubble is hopefully back up too if you did have to bubble on the first one, but you do not have to bubble on this one if you pop it fast enough. So if you pop your Stormwarder's Boon fast enough, you'll get down the whelps, right? And it'll be done before she casts Hail Bombs, which is the ice ability on the ground. And your thing will finish before she finishes or casts to that, and you can just walk out of it like normal. So this is a completely safe place to use Stormeater's Boon. So now you have it on a first big pull, and you have it on whelp, so you're getting huge value out of Stormeater's Boon. It's also worth noting, even if you are focusing on single target on a tyrannical week or something, Stormeater's Boon is just passive. So you're doing damage to the boss, you're also killing the whelps, and you could technically single target the boss if you wanted to. That's not what I do usually, but you could do that. So after we defeat that first boss, we have our second use right here, and we didn't have to use bubble. If we're very lucky, we haven't had to use it yet, or we used it defensively at some point. But it is worth noting, yeah, as long as you do this safely, you don't need it there. So you could use it later on in that first hallway if you needed to, and it would still now would be up for your third use, right? And the third use is one where you may need it, but it's not super dangerous either as far as this goes. So when we come over here to this trash, what we have is basically, especially in pugs, because you obviously don't want to do the dragons, but you have the 2 dragons, and then you have the elemental with caster groups everywhere, right? So the ideal place to use it is obviously, you know, this here would be an elemental and some casters around it, and then like a patrol, right? And so if you do that all in one big pull, that's where you would want to use it. Now you just want to use it when it's up again. So if you used it on the first whelps, it might not be up for this first group. It might be, depending on how long it took you to kill the boss. But you want to use it on a group like that if possible. If not, you still want to use it here to get the next use out of it. Ideally in Ruby Life Pools, you do want to get 4 uses. Again, unless you're doing a really low key. If you're doing a really high key, you know, you might get 5 uses, but that's not really what this video is necessarily for. It's honestly mostly for just to kind of teach you how using it is actually safe as a Ret Paladin. So let's say you just use it on a pack. Now, let's say this. Let's say you are excellent pulling dragons. It's popping up. It's coming off cooldown at the worst time. If you have to solo use it on a dragon, right? Either of the 2 dragons that can pad over and get pulled, especially in pug groups, they can get pulled, right? It's just something that happens. If that happens, you can use it on the dragon, but if you get, it's very similar to the first pull, where if you get unlucky and you're the one targeted with the frontal, in this case from the dragon, you need to have your bubble ready, right? Now you're just using it, it's single target damage, it's not necessary to use, but it's just another use of it, right? It's like, why not use it? But you would need to bubble or have bubble ready if you're going to use it on a dragon pull. You need to have bubble ready just in case. I'm not exactly sure what the timing is. If you use it right after the dragon selects somebody from the frontal, like literally, like, and then the first couple seconds of your trinket is during the cast of it, then you can actually probably get away with, even if it targets you on the next one, it's probably going to be done if you're really quick with it. And a lot of times that's how this trinket works. If you're really quick with it, just like the hail bombs on the first boss, you can actually avoid that. But ideally, you're popping on this elemental pack, and the only thing you want to do is you want to pop it at the beginning of the pack, because what could be the issue when the mobs die, you know, the one does the spinny circle thing, and then the elemental obviously does the giant explosion thing. And so you don't want to necessarily be stuck there when that's going off, unless of course you're willing to bubble it or ready to bubble it. So it's better to use it at the beginning of that pull, obviously, not the end of the pull. This is also a terrible boss to use it on because of all the movement, needing to bait things. Even if you get targeted and bubble, if you just happen to be in the bad spot, you bubble and survive, but you might screw over everybody else by where your boulder went here on the second boss. And so now we have 3 uses of trash here, and our last use is going to want to be on the trash as well, and that's going to be because this last boss is also not a very good boss to use it on. So the best time to use it is if your group does like a big pull right here at the end of bridge, or if your group pulls like this group into this group. That's not a bad time, and like the sides and everything in. If you're going to pull there, that's another really good time to use Spiteful Storm. And in this case, there's nothing really that you can stand in and die. So as long as you're in good position when you pop it, again, this is a very safe place to use it. And that's why Ruby Life Pools is actually one of the perfect dungeons for this trinket. Now, I use it in every single dungeon, but this dungeon in particular is very safe to use it. You really only have one instance, that's the very first pull of the dungeon, where it's a decent chance that you have to waste your bubble for it. And every other pull is actually fairly safe as long as you know when to use it. And you're using it at the correct times, right? You want to use it mostly on trash. The first boss is a difference because there's all these whelps that come out and they do need to die. And it is just passive damage, it's trinket damage. And the only other thing you would argue is to use a single target trinket or something like that. But we're just talking about using Storm Eater's Boon, in particular here. So yeah, that's Ruby Life Pools. How to use it. You want to get 4 uses if possible. We went over all of them. Have your bubble ready if possible. If you do have to bubble, pop your Blessing of Sacrifice on somebody, so you're helping out the group a little bit, and you're using a defensive, even though you're not using your bubble necessarily defensively. And yeah, that can be a good way to be able to use this trinket. And you can kind of take these things that we learned. In some dungeons, you're going to realize, right, just how in some dungeons you're going to realize that the way that the abilities are staggered, it's very hard to use it without bubble, and you'll almost have to have bubble for every single pull. In other dungeons, you realize that it's hard to do big pulls in certain dungeons, especially this season, right? Last season would have actually been a great time to have Storm Eater's Boon, but this season, you're going to realize that there's some dungeons that are harder than others to do so. If we go to obviously the place of big pulls here, Algathar's Academy. This trinket is just absolutely amazing in Algathar's Academy. If you do the first room, big giant pull in the tree room, the only issue with it on that particular pull is if the tank does a ton of movement instead of just barely dragging them out of the green crap that goes on the floor, the green swirlies. If the tank pulls them way out, you're gonna have to bubble, and you're not gonna do damage. But it's actually really good trinket. If you have another trinket to use on that first pull, it's actually really good for the boss and all the ads that the boss summons on Overgrown Ancient. And then usually my second use is going to be on the trash in front of Bird Boss, which is not super efficient. It's like I'm going to use it on like the final Eagle pull or something like that come out. Or if you're in like a super advanced group that knows how to pull multiple groups. And then then I'll use it again here on right before Veximus. If you do a big pull right before Veximus, I'll use it there. And again, there's very little to worry about there from dying, actually. And then for right before the last boss, if you do a big pull into the room or a big pull outside before you go into the dragon boss, that's where you would use it the last time. Now, these ones are more where you think in your head, well, what if they're doing their spinny thing on top of you? These are more ones where you might have to actually use your bubble. But really just that one, and then maybe on the trash before Croth. But again, if you actually time it out to where one bird does frontal and the other bird does frontal, you could technically use it after that second frontal chooses its target and be fine. But you might not want to wait that long, right? So you might have to bubble a frontal in that case. But we're not here to talk about that dungeon. I'm just wanted to give another example of another really good dungeon to use it in. So yeah, that's Storm Eater's Boon. I know, you know, there's been some talk about it's not a good trinket and stuff like that because you can't move, but for Ret Paladins, it is a good trinket, and it'll do a very high percentage of your damage as well in a standard Mythic Plus run if you use it correctly. So I want to do more videos like this where I kind of like get into the nitty gritty of Ret Paladin stuff, and I don't do them often enough, I know. But yeah, hopefully this can help some people out. If you get this trinket, it's very good. It's very fun to use trinket. There's a little risk factor to it. You know, it's maybe a little bit more fun. Maybe you don't want to use it in a group that's trying to push the world first key or something like that because you don't want to grief your group. But in every other group, it's pretty fun to use in my opinion. So that'll be it for this one. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel because that helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody have a good one.